Hello everyone, welcome back to Alkaline Hydroxide 784. And yes, today in the mathematics series, we have finished all the content. And this will be kind of like a conclusion episode. Or not really a conclusion episode. This is more like the exam strategies and generally how you do well in maths, basically. So, please forgive me if I'm a bit long-winded or something. To be honest, I'm always long-winded, so I guess you already know that by now. But let's see how this goes, shall we? So, so what I'm gonna do is I will talk about the before, during, and after the paper in a way. But I'll tell it all in one episode, unlike the GP one. You know, in the GP series, we did separate episodes for before the paper, during the paper, after the paper. But for this, since we are more focused on the content, this final episode will be more of a summary of what you need to do using the content that you now have, and or if you're still learning the content, what you should be doing in order to learn it well and do well in maths in general. Okay, so I think this is going to take a while, so if you want to watch it and pause it in the middle and watch it later, you can do that as well. I'm not stopping you from doing that. So the very first thing is, the main idea of today's episode is how to do well in maths. And I'll be answering that question from various points, I guess. So the very first thing that really helps one do well in any subject, not just maths, is passion, or the fact that you like doing the subject. So, of course, there's a difference between merely liking the subject and actually having a passion for it, because I've experienced both. It's very obvious, in a way. I mean, there was a period of time where I was very, very into doing, like, reading stuff about maths and things like that. And of course, I still do enjoy reading a book that's about maths. But nowadays it's a bit more muted, and I'm more interested in other topics. My interests keep changing over time. Like in primary school, I was into maths quite a bit, and especially in lower secondary. And after that, I became more interested in chemistry. But I still like maths. I'm still in, like, but I was even more interested in chemistry. And nowadays I'm quite interested in linguistics, even though I don't even study linguistics. Never mind. Okay. Uh Never mind, that's not important now. Let's just go to the main point. The point is, if you like doing maths, you'll automatically feel motivated to study it, and or if you may not even need to study it, you may be already very well in tune to the knowledge that maths has. Effortless to do well in maths for some of you. But sometimes you may have the passion but not the skill. I mean, that's possible too. It's kind of like, but then it depends on the person. Like if you're really really passionate, then it's very likely that you have the skill as well. If you kind of like the subject, which is different from being passionate, but not really have that much skill or that much ability, you sometimes need to practice to do it, and that's what passion is needed. Like, that's where passion needs to come in for you to bring yourself to the maximum ability. But since most of you may not really have the passion for maths, I would suggest that you at least have a liking for maths, like appreciate it. Because even though maths seems very abstract to some of you, especially stuff like complex numbers and vectors and things like that, they really do have a application in the real world. Even in physics and chemistry, you can see the influence of maths. Basically, you need maths to do some of the stuff that you do in physics and chemistry. And even without looking at physics and chemistry, the subject, there are many other places in which maths has a place, a big part to play. If you look at something, there are many different things that maths covers. There's stuff like knot theory, and there's stuff like the topographical kind of stuff. Of course, that's not covered in A level maths, but if you realize there's so much more to maths than just A level stuff. So yeah, that's important to realize, and you should you should at least appreciate maths, find that there's a value in learning maths. Even though you may not really use most of it if you're not really doing a maths related degree, or if you're not doing engineering or something, but you will still find some use for it, or you find some importance for it. Especially, I think for most people, the most useful part of maths will be the statistics, because many disciplines use statistics, and it's also very useful when you're reading the news and you see all those medical, discoveries and things like that, and then you realize, oh, should I really trust these findings? Are they done properly? Are they done with the right, like, what's the so-called critical value they've used? Or you know what I mean, right? You can relate it back to what you learn in statistics, or even if you don't remember the terms in statistics, you at least know to be a bit more wary about the data that you see on the newspaper or anywhere for that matter. So yeah, I guess this has become more of how to appreciate maths and how to do well in maths. But anyway, that's just the point. Do appreciate maths. That's the first thing that you need to do. And if, of course, if you're passionate about maths, things are a lot easier, but at least appreciate it. So the next thing is diligence. I do not know why I just wrote diligence there in my Word document. But the idea is that, if, of course, this would apply to any subject as well. You have to be diligent in what you're doing. If you're just happy and you like the thing so much, but you're not committed to doing something about it, or you're not committed to working towards understanding more, or being better at that subject, then that's really not going to bring you anywhere. But of course, in the A levels, I mean, the goal is just very, very simplistic. It's just like, oh, get A. That's it's a very what can I say? It's a very superficial kind of goal. So, but I guess since it's very straightforward, at least work towards that goal. Yeah. So how do you do that? Like, how do you study properly and do well in maths, for that matter? So the very first thing is to make sure you don't have to study so much later on. Like the very first thing you need to do is to learn the stuff well, so that later on you don't need to spend so much time trying to relearn the stuff in A levels. This is very useful because sometimes if you don't learn something, then you're spending a lot of hours just trying to relearn it and try to get it back into your head later on. Or if you mislearn something, you wrongly learn the concept, then it's very painful for you. This applies to any subject as well, I guess. Yeah, this is more like how to do well in anything. Anyways, so for math specifically, it kind of depends on when you learn that particular concept. The earlier you learned it, the earlier you learn the concept, the better, I feel. Because for me especially, since I managed to learn some of the concepts in secondary school, because I was in that program, the advanced math program, it kind of helped me a lot, because then I didn't have to study it again in JC. I could just use whatever I remember and just apply it again. And yeah, of course, for me, obviously, the stuff that I find newer will be harder for me to do than stuff that I'm already familiar with. It's like part and parcel. I've practiced it so much before, and it's like ingrained in my head, that kind of stuff. So so yeah, it's always better to learn the content as early as you can. But that doesn't mean that if you haven't learned it yet and you are gonna go to JC next year, you suddenly had to start mugging or something. You don't have to. Please enjoy your time while you can. But if you're in JC already, and if you realize that there's a concept that you haven't grasped fully, please, as early as possible, go and get that concept in your head, and make sure you can understand it as quickly as possible. Because the earlier you understand it, the earlier you can get to seeing where else you make mistakes within that topic. If you already struggle with the conceptual understanding, then it's quite hard to move forward in a way. So for those who are currently in JC1 or JC or like are going to JC2 next year, the main thing I would advise you to do is, of course, listen in lectures, or if you can understand from reading the notes itself, please do. Just make sure that you know what you understand the concepts once by the time the topic is over. If, for example, you're studying vectors, make sure you understand all the concepts in vectors, or at least understand how to use the stuff that's written there in the vectors book by the time your school is done teaching the vectors chapter. You shouldn't be like still confused on what exactly the dot product or cross product is after the vectors topic. If you are a bit confused, or if you just keep mixing up the two, that's okay, but you should at least know what the two of them mean, like what it means to have a dot product or a cross product. And by what it means is, you should look at it as, I mean, if in vectors, as long as you have that formula, or as long as you have the visual understanding, you should be good. Yeah. And you should follow this for all of your topics. Even if you think it's something simple like statistics, you must understand what it means to do this particular thing if you really want to do well in maths. But the thing is, you don't really have to be super intuitive about some of the information here, because as you can tell, even I have only gotten some intuitive idea of what the concept is after the A levels, not really during the A levels. Like for example, the thing about the line being like a collection of dots. I think even though I might have heard about it and maybe understood it, it's only now that I really understand it at that fundamental detail of the dots in a sense. But the more fundamentally you can understand it, the better it is, because it's more ingrained in your head. So yeah, please do pay attention in your lectures, and if you have any doubts, ask your teachers or your friends. If you're a bit too scared, just ask someone about it, because that's better than not doing anything about it. Or if you feel that you cannot trust your friends, or if you don't understand them, then go to the internet, go and watch either my video or Khan Academy or whatever. Just find a way to understand the concept. That's the important part. So yeah, that's the first hurdle, understanding the concepts. And the second hurdle is, of course, applying the concepts. And after you understand them, you must apply them properly. I think this is what usually led to my problems in physics, because sometimes I would kind of half understand it and then screw up the application of the concept. But in maths, usually it's very straightforward, because there's no like the application part isn't too big on it. It's only there for differentiation and integration. That's where you get application questions. So like in a way. But and for statistics, it's quite intuitive. Like they are literally linked together with application. So for the other topics, it's pretty straightforward. Even if you're given a situation, you can actually write it in a purely mathematical form, like a very abstract manner. And that is the interesting thing about mathematics. It can be pretty abstract at times, and some people find that a bit unnerving. But I kind of like it, so I don't know. Or maybe I just find it easier to understand things. I don't have too many contextual stuff involved in it, compared to something that has way too much context and too many factors affecting the question. So yeah, do realize that. But yeah, so how do you apply the concepts properly? So if you've understood the concepts properly, and you've been listening in lectures, or at least reading your notes, you'll find out that there are certain ways to apply the equations into the questions, and how you are supposed to present it and do all of those things. So as a student, you should, if you have your own way of doing the question, go ahead. But the most important thing to take note of is a presentation. Make sure that your presentation is clear and it shows your so-called thought process well. By thought process, you don't have to write down, oh, I thought this is the way to do it. Like you don't need to write an essay there. Although to be honest, I do tend to write quite a bit, even in maths questions. So it depends on the person. Some people prefer to write out their strategy. If it depends on the topic as well. So yeah. So if you have something to write down, you can. If you don't have anything to write down and you're very confident in showing it out in the mathematical expressions itself, then just do that. You can just make sure it's clear and you don't skip too many intermediate steps, because intermediate steps can give you marks as well in maths. So please don't forget the intermediate steps. So so it's best to do it at the beginning itself. Although to be honest, I don't do it at the beginning itself. Like I tend to be very super concise working kind of thing at the beginning, and then in the exam I'll be like super elaborate or something. Yeah, I don't know how, but if you cannot really do that, if you cannot really switch between super concise, the squeeze in in the little section of your foolscap paper, to being super elaborate and taking up the entire page, you should stick to the elaborate part a bit more, and like try not to be too concise with your workings in your tutorials itself. So you know what I mean? Yeah. So for application, you should try to practice the presentation in your tutorial itself and make sure that you write it properly and you know what's the order of the steps and things like that. Because even though maths is actually just about how you're not how you can apply the stuff you know and just answer the question, you also need to show some kind of organization in your answer. So please do that. And that's why handwriting is also important, because if you write your numbers weirdly and and maybe your one looks like a 7 or something, then that's not gonna end well, so yeah, that's important. So apart from presentation, you also need to know what you're doing. You don't want to be starting off in thinking, oh yes, I'm gonna solve the question, and then halfway through you have no idea what you're doing. You're just stuck there. I mean, this means when I'm doing physics, but okay. You're just stuck there and you have no idea where to go. If you're in that kind of situation, then it's either that you made a careless mistake in your working and maybe that's why you're stuck, or you just overthought the entire problem, and by the time you finished one step, you kind of forgot the rest of the steps and your mind is just in a fumble about what you're supposed to do. So yeah, sometimes it's better not to be too complicated, but if you are a complicated thinker, which I can kind of relate to sometimes, then you have to be really, really organized, otherwise you're gonna be confusing yourself halfway through. So be very careful about that kind of stuff, like organization and your thought process. Make sure that you remember your thought process throughout the question. Sometimes it's better to be simple, don't overdo it. Like don't overcomplicate your working as well. Like there's a difference between simple and concise. Concise is like you literally skip all the intermediate steps, but simple is more of, there's two methods to do it. There's method A is a lot simpler and a lot easier to write down and think through and get the answer, and method B is just overthinking. So you do method A. Yeah, just save your time. Okay, save your time. An exam is also useful to save your time that way. So after the application part, time to actually do the exam and see whether you are good at both understanding the concepts and application. Actually, there's a third thing which is called carelessness. Carelessness as well as time management. Basically, your skills during the paper, like how well you can work under the 3 hour time limit, which is actually a lot of time. Like, let's face it. In history, I had to write 3 essays, or like one SPQ and 2 essays in 3 hours. And maths, there's not nearly as much writing to do in that same amount of time. So honestly, yeah. But of course, it is still possible to end up in a situation where you don't finish the paper in 3 hours. But let's see what are the tips to minimize that as much as possible. So I think this will be like the part during the paper, like how you're supposed to do stuff during the paper. So during the paper, you will be worried about two things. One is the time, two is whether you're doing things correctly. Yeah, and if you forget to bring your jacket, the third thing will be the AC, obviously. Yeah, so please do bring your jacket if you get cold, because if you're cold, then you cannot think, and if you cannot think, you cannot do your maths paper. And I'm not kidding, I'm being serious. Please. Also bring some water so that if you get a headache, you can drink some water and clear up your mind. Yeah, so that's the essentials apart from your stationery. So for the time limit, the main thing that you'll be concerned about is whether you can finish all of your 12 or 13 questions within the 3-hour time limit. And the answer to that is yes, you can. You can very well finish all of the questions within 3 hours, because otherwise they wouldn't give you that many questions, if you think about it. And the reason why people don't finish the paper is usually because they get too stuck at one question and then they waste 30 minutes or 1 hour on that one question. You know how much time that is that you could have used to do all of your other questions. And of course, you may be saying, well, I know what you're gonna say. You're gonna say just skip that question and then do all the other questions. But then you still won't be finishing the paper. But in that scenario, at least you only missed that one question compared to spending way too much time on that one question and then missing a bunch of questions that you could have totally finished. You know what I mean? Yeah, this less damage, minimizing damage here. So, yeah, please be careful about that. Please be conscious about the fact that you might get stuck on a random question. And as much as, even if I keep telling you this and if you think I'm just repeating myself again and again, you may still end up in the same trap. You may go and do a question and be like, oh no, what is this? But your mind is like, oh no, I need to finish this question before I move on. It happens. You must let go of that so that you can actually move on and finish the other questions before you do this question. Yeah. So what is the time that you should spend on a question before moving on? I think it depends. Like, if the question is supposed to be something that's like 3 marks, then if you still cannot do the question after 5 minutes, then or at least start on the question after 5 minutes, then move on. If it's something that's more like 10 marks or more, then you might take up 10 minutes to do it, but it really depends on how many questions you have left. If you feel like if you already have this premonition that, oh, I'm gonna spend a lot of time on this question, then just don't even bother starting the question, just go and do the other questions first. Yeah, it's really up to you. Anyway, it's like your decision, your choice. And if the easiest way to facilitate this in terms of your foolscap paper or any other booklet that you have is to allocate. If you have foolscap paper, it's very easy. You can just use a separate paper for that question and just slot it in between. Maybe if you're trying to do question 7 and you didn't do it yet, and you finish question 6 and 8, make sure they're on separate papers, and then question 7 can be slotted in between them. Yeah, just be aware of that kind of stuff. It'll make your marker's life easier as well. So yeah, that's for the time management. But one of the major areas where people lose marks is careless mistakes. I mean, look, even the people who are super passionate about maths and who do very well in maths Olympiads, they make careless mistakes too. I mean, yeah. And I'm not even referring to me. I'm referring to people who are like really really good, but they can still make careless mistakes, and that's where they usually lose their marks. Not really because of conceptual misunderstandings, but because of careless mistakes. And what exactly are those careless mistakes that they miss out on? It's usually something as simple as a plus or a minus. I miss out on that a lot too. And or it could be just illegible handwriting. I don't know, it depends. Some people have really illegible handwriting and they end up misreading their own handwriting sometimes. It's possible. And it could also just be the fact that you wrote the answer in one place but you then use a different number accidentally, or you miswrite one of the numbers in the next step. So please be very careful about it. Make sure your working is clear enough for you to read, and you know which part of it is which. Like there's a sequential order to your working, so that you don't get lost. If let's say if you're given a certain space to do the working in, which doesn't really make sense, they usually give you foolscap to do it in, so you can just keep doing it in a nice column kind of writing there. You don't have to use a small space in your paper to do your working. But if you do have that kind of scenario, then try to use like one half of the space first, then draw a nice line with your pencil in between, and then continue the working. Don't just write it all over the place, honestly. This will at least look nicer than writing it all over the place. So yeah, so what are the different ways to avoid these careless mistakes apart from organizing your answer well? One way is this thing that I've used in primary school, which is just to redo the working again, like redo the question, or you can work it backwards. But I don't think you have time for that in A levels, because even though you have 3 hours, you're very likely to use a lot of that time doing the paper itself, unless you're really fast or something, and you're bound to spend some time, waste some time on certain questions. Even if, let's say, you skip it, you will have wasted 10 minutes on that before that, so you won't have that much time to go and redo all of the working for everything. So that may not really be the best method. Unless you're doing PSLE, then yeah, you can totally do that. You have more than enough time to like do the paper twice. Don't ask me why. Anyways, but but in A levels, what do? You could just read through your working again. But sometimes if you, from exam fatigue, you may just be like, whatever, I'm confident in whatever I wrote, why should I read through it? I'm not gonna find anything even if I read through it. Yeah, that's true. Sometimes that happens. Like I'll be reading through my workings and then I still cannot spot the careless mistake. But it is more likely than not that I do spot a careless mistake by reading through it carefully. So please read through the working carefully and see if there's any careless mistakes like plus, minus, anything. Even if in the end it didn't cause a problem for your final answer, you don't want to lose working marks for messing up your working. So please be careful and read carefully through your working if you can. If you don't have time, then it's okay. But yeah, just try your best to do it. But if you want to prioritize certain questions to check, then I would recommend checking questions in which you get a weird answer, like your answer seems a bit weird and not very normal. Usually the vectors questions will always have some weird answer, like those fraction kind of vectors, and those are the places where you definitely should check it twice just to make sure that there isn't any careless mistake. But at the same time, don't immediately doubt your answer just because you got a bunch of fractions that are like 38 over 59 or something. It's possible. In vectors, it's very possible to get a fraction for your answer. Just make sure that that your working is correct, and once it is correct, then have confidence in your answer and move on. So yeah, but there are some questions that are very simple, or like questions where you're supposed to prove something, and if you don't get that proof, you obviously have a careless mistake somewhere or like something that you missed out. And in those questions, then you should immediately check for the careless mistake instead of waiting until the last minute to do that. Especially if you can easily spot it, just immediately correct it and move on. So yeah, so that's how you reduce careless mistakes. So now we will look at what happens in the worst case scenario. Like, you somehow look at each and every question, or maybe not each and every question, but quite a few questions, and then you're like, oh no, I do not know what to do, and you start panicking, and you only have 30 minutes left because you panic so much from looking at each and every question and spending 10 minutes on each of them and then panicking more and more, you know. Please don't panic. Like, that's the main important thing. It's very helpful to not panic. I've experienced stuff like that myself, but not with multiple questions, but with one single question that really, really got my, panic mode on. If I panic, I usually mess up. If I do not panic, I'll try my best to get as many marks as I can. So I think the best strategy here is to not panic. As much as your body instinctively wants to panic, try your best to calm yourself down. Drink some water. Just think about it. Like think, oh look, I still have time to do this. I mean, even if it's 30 minutes, 30 minutes is enough time to write a solution for the question. Think about that. There's more than enough time to write a solution. Even 5 minutes is enough to write a solution. Just make sure that you think of the solution before the 5 minutes. Of course, if you only have 1 minute left, then go ahead and panic. Unless you're trying to panic over finding a careless mistake, then please don't, because you can actually make a big difference if by finding a careless mistake. So yeah, don't panic. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Don't panic even if you're in the worst case scenario. But what else should you be doing in that worst case scenario? Well, the first thing you can do is to see which question out of those hard questions is the least hard. Like at least see which one has the most, like, possibility of getting correct, you know what I mean? And then you do that question first. Or if you notice that there's a question with multiple parts, at least attempt the parts at the beginning. You know, the ones that are easier to do, the 1 mark one, 2 mark one. I'm pretty sure some of them will be super easy to do. At least finish those parts first. I assume you would have done that by now, but just in case you haven't, finish that first. And then afterwards you attempt the easiest question in the hard questions, and you think about it again. Like, since you would have already spent enough time panicking over each question in turn, go back to the first question that you panicked over very long ago, and approach it with a fresh mind. Like, think about it again, because sometimes giving a break to the question, like a break between seeing the question once and seeing it again, does help you to get an answer sometimes. And yeah, this is also useful for when you're studying. If you're doing a question and you have a lot of trouble doing it, sometimes the best thing you can do is just not do the question first, just leave it alone, and then reattempt it the next day, or reattempt it after a few hours if you don't have that much time. Then you will sometimes be able to find the answer immediately once you come back to the question. So please do remember that as well. So yeah, in the paper, I think this is pretty much all of the stuff I can talk about during the paper. I think the final thing for during the paper will be the GC. How much should you rely on the GC? Of course, you need to bring your GC. You cannot afford to not bring your GC. That's how it has become. I mean, I have told you many times that I've risked my GC, just failing on me big time, and it has like during the exam it will just off, and I'll be like spanking it to get it to work again. Yeah, like I wasted time like that. Oh wow. Okay, anyways, since you all don't have a battery GC, it should be fine. As long as you charge it, it should work. So should how much should you rely on the GC? Well, technically you should be able to do both situations, where you can attempt the question without using the GC at all, especially if it's something like what partial fractions or something like that, like your complex numbers, you're trying to split it up, the division by complex number. You should be able to do that manually, because sometimes if your GC is not working, or if it doesn't have a lot of battery, you would want to prioritize it for the stuff that actually requires a GC. You don't want to be using it for each and every question. But at the same time, you should also know how to use a GC to make your life easier and to make your work faster. Because especially, the very first question in paper 1, it will just be that thing with the simultaneous equations. You are actually allowed to use a GC or even your scientific calculator, because actually you can just use a scientific calculator. Why use your GC? Yeah. But if you should be able to use your calculator for that, you don't really need to do that manually, even though it is the easiest thing to do manually. Just 3 equations, you can work it out. No problem. So yeah, like, do know how to use your calculator as well. But at the same time, don't over rely on your calculator for each and everything that you see in a question, because sometimes typing it into the GC may take time, but sometimes typing it into the GC will take less time than the amount of time it takes for you to work things out. So you decide for yourself. Depends on your skills, your like how good you are at writing down all those things, and how good you are at thinking through it and not making careless mistakes in the process. So yeah, please do, look into that on your own, like see what stuff you can use your GC for, what stuff you definitely shouldn't be bothering to use your GC for, and things like that. And of course, as I mentioned just now, you can also use your scientific calculator. Even for things like stats, it is possible to use a scientific calculator. So do bring both your scientific calculator and your GC. Even if you think you want to use your GC throughout, I think you should be on the safe side and bring your scientific calculator. So yeah, that's my opinion on GC reliance, because I obviously was for a certain period of time not at all reliant on my GC, because I didn't want to deal with it offing on me. But at the same time, I realized that it was useful to use it if it was actually on. So I might as well use it when I can. So instead of not using it just because I'm scared of it offing. And it helped me a lot in saving my time during the paper. So yeah, that's how you do your paper in the best way that you can do it. Oh yeah, a final thing that I have to say, on time management. Sometimes you will be doing your questions at the very beginning, and they're like the easy ones, and you're just taking your own sweet time to make sure that your presentation looks nice. Yes, of course, it is important to make your presentation look nice, but do not spend too much time on it, because sometimes I tend to waste time that way. Like I would be doing something like solving an equation that is just super simple, and I'll just be like, oh, okay, I really need to make my X and my Y look super legible and make sure that it looks neat. Yes, that's important, but honestly, there's a certain amount of time that you require for doing it, and I do not want that certain amount of time to be too much time. So sometimes I will write it a little bit fast first, and then later on go and cancel the entire thing and write it neatly if I actually have that much time. But sometimes by the very beginning, I would tend to waste way too much time on the first few questions doing that, and that might affect my later questions in a way. So please be careful about that. Do not dilly dally at the beginning. Think about it as a time limit right from the start. Of course, don't over pressurize yourself thinking, oh, I only have 5 minutes to do this question. Don't think about it that way, but just think about doing it quickly. Just think, okay, I need to do this quickly. I shouldn't be dilly dallying, that's all. Don't think more than that. And just do the question quickly, and at the same time do it carefully. Don't anyhow do the question just because you need to do it quickly or anything. Yeah, so that's important. That's pretty important too. So I already talked for very long. Oh no. So the next part is about studying methods, basically, before and after the paper in a way. I already did mention on the two main things you need to worry about, which is the conceptual understanding and application. But this is more of how you study, like what stuff you use to study and what resources you use. So many people will of course be using either the TYS or the past year papers to study for maths exams. I mean by study is more like practicing the questions, not really looking at notes for that matter, because maths is mostly just doing a lot of questions. And yeah, the very first resource that you have is your tutorials. So make sure you do your tutorials as much as you can. You don't have to do all the advanced questions or the extra questions, but at the very minimum, finish the questions that are part of the syllabus. Like make sure you do those. As long as you can do those properly, you're better off than people who don't do the tutorial and they just come to the class and then expect the answer to come. And then they end up having to look at it again later, which is a waste of time. It's better for you to finish it beforehand, and by the time you know where you struggle and where you're able to do it without any issues, and you can really focus on the places where you actually have trouble rather than looking through the entire tutorial again. So that's important. Please do your tutorials. And the next resource will also, of course, be all of these extra questions that the schools will print out for you, like the stuff that you do during June or December or whatever, those extra practice questions. Like they're not really tied to any particular paper, but they're like just topical question revision in the sense. On whether I suggest for you to do it or not, well, it depends on you. If you have the time, then do it. If you really do not have the time, then don't worry. You can just at least make sure to keep them around. Like, don't throw them away. Like, when it really comes to the period of time and you have nothing else to practice on, then at least you have these questions to practice on. Or if you want to focus on a very particular topic, this will be a useful resource. But it is not necessary to do them if you're already decently good at maths. But if you're not good at it, then go ahead and do the questions and get some extra practice to minimize careless mistakes and things like that. Because let's be honest, no one has really finished all of their June practice questions. Even I haven't done it. Like, honestly, I have like undone questions. So yeah, well, it's not really compulsory to finish that. But you should still, at least know that you have that. Don't forget about it entirely. So the next resource will be papers, past year papers, other school papers, TYS. Which one should you be doing? Well, I think in my opinion, if you're looking at a school paper, do your school's past year papers for that particular exam, because that will have the most relevant topics for that exam, and at the same time you get the experience of doing a paper. But when it comes to the A levels, I don't really think you need to be doing any past year papers per se. The past year papers can be done before prelims, like you use the other school papers or things like that for doing prelims revision. But once prelims is over, you don't actually need them. You can just use TYS exclusively and practice on TYS, because if you realize the A levels is not gonna be in the same rigorous, like the same style of the school papers. But of course, some of you may be saying, oh wait, but the school papers are more rigorous than the A level papers, so if I do it, won't it help me? Well, I guess you can say that, but if let's say you're already good at it, then you don't need to waste your time doing extra papers. But if you think you need the extra challenge to help you be more ready for the paper, then go ahead and do the past year papers. But I would suggest that you finish the TYS before you do the past year papers instead of doing it the other way around. Because the TYS is more relevant to Cambridge style rather than doing your school questions. Like, you know what I mean? Like, they have different styles of asking, and they have different things that they expect, even though those differences may be quite subtle. So it's very important to do the TYS. Even if you think the TYS is too easy, just do it. Just finish it off quick. If you want to do it quickly, then just do it quickly. But at the same time, don't do your TYS too early, because if you do it too early, then you don't have anything to practice on. Then you're forced to do the past year papers. And even though that's not a bad thing or anything, it's like you already finished the TYS and you don't feel like revisiting it again if you do that. So I suggest you only do your TYS in either like maybe before prelims or after, or you can do it exclusively in between prelims and A levels if you can. It's totally possible. If you schedule well, it's possible. Or if you just forgot about your TYS until then, yeah, that's pretty much your that's pretty much your fate, I guess. But of course, when it comes to TYS, you can choose to start from the oldest paper till the newest paper, because when you do the newest paper closest to your A levels, you have the newest format in your head. But if you feel like you don't have enough time, then don't do all of the papers first. Like, you can start from in between and then do until the newest paper. And then if you really have time after that, you can just do the questions in the older papers. It's possible. That's really up to you to decide. It's your own strategy. But what I did was I did from 2009 and then went upwards from there instead of doing it from the latest paper. Even though the schools made us, even though my JC made us do the the very latest paper, which was 2017 paper at the time, because I did A levels last year. the uh, but if but I didn't do the 2016 paper until the end, like until very close to the actual exam. So really, that's up to you to decide. So yeah, that's how you use those resources in terms of questions or papers and things like that. So the other kind of resource that's available is your teachers and your friends, like people you can actually ask information from. And the third kind of resource will be the internet, stuff that you can find online. So the second resource, which is your teachers and your friends, well, I think that's a very important resource indeed, because they will have the most, like, relevant knowledge for A levels per se, because A levels has a very certain style of doing the questions and a certain amount of stuff that you need to know, because there could be extra things that are taught online, or there could be not enough things taught online for that particular topic. So it's important to first refer to your teachers or to your friends, for help if you have any doubts in the concept, or if you have any doubt doing a particular question. But if you really need some extra help with your conceptual understanding, you can go and watch online videos, and you can watch my video or Khan Academy videos, because I think the videos I do are more for people who are already there, like they already studied quite a bit for the subject and they just need a recap. That's what my videos function as. They're not really meant for people who want to go all the way from the beginning again. So you must have already learned the topic in school in order to watch my videos. But if you're really starting from bare minimum, then you should watch Khan Academy videos or other online videos before you watch my video. Yeah, that's my disclaimer here. I'm saying the disclaimer too late, but yeah, you get the idea. But I think it's still okay lah. You can still watch my video. But if there's any issues, do say it in the comments below. I really need some feedback. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. So yeah, that's for the second and the third resource. Are there any other resources? I think that's pretty much it. Like, if you use all of these resources efficiently, or if you realize that you don't really need them, then you don't really have to use them too much, then you focus on your other subjects. But if you're on the other end where you really need to study for maths, then use those resources as much as you can, but don't overdo it until you end up just exhausting yourself doing one subject. Do your other subjects as well. I as much as I And of course, if you're the kind of person who likes doing maths, you will feel very sad after the maths paper because you don't have a reason to study maths. I'm not kidding you. Okay, that was a weird way to end. Okay. But like, don't overdo one subject, do all of your subjects equally. So if you would like a commentary on the two papers specifically, I can do a video on that, but I'm not exactly sure what to talk about because I already have the TDBTP for those two, and I don't really have anything specific to say for paper 1 and paper 2 because I just study for both in the same way. I just do the papers and then that's it. I don't really do anything specific for paper 1 versus paper 2. The only thing I had to really say for paper 2 is that you use your GC more, and you need to be aware of the template. Like paper 2, the hypothesis testing especially has its own template on how you answer the question, so you need to know that template. But apart from that, it's pretty much the same stuff that you need to do to study for both paper 1 and paper 2. So yeah, with that, I hope you found this video useful. I think it was quite long, but I have tried my best to give you as much information as I can, or as much advice more of, on how to do well in maths, and also hopefully inspired you to be a bit more appreciative of maths in general. And yeah, if you did find it useful, please press the like button and subscribe. And with that, I would like to say thank you and bye.